Tiberius, the second figure to ascend the imperial throne of Rome, navigated a whirlwind of unprecedented changes and trials throughout his long and complex life. Although he was the stepson of the great Augustus, his path to supreme power was fraught with difficulty, as he was never considered his stepfather's primary or obvious choice as heir to the imperial dignity. Born in 43 BCE into one of Rome's most ancient and influential families, Tiberius enjoyed numerous privileges granted by Augustus from a young age. These early years laid the foundation for his future, as he accompanied the emperor in momentous peace negotiations with the powerful Parthians. During these diplomatic maneuvers, Augustus triumphantly recovered the lost Roman standards, which had been ignominiously seized by the enemy in the catastrophic Battle of Carrhae, an event that left a deep scar on Rome's collective memory. Tiberius himself proved to be an exceptionally gifted and capable commander, earning fame and respect on the empire's turbulent northern frontiers. His military successes and ability to win the hearts of soldiers made him a favorite of the legions, though this popularity did not always translate to the political arena in Rome. After an unsuccessful and, by some accounts, tumultuous marriage to Julia, Augustus' daughter, Tiberius decided to withdraw into a more or less voluntary exile on the island of Rhodes. He spent 8 long years there, much to the deep displeasure of Augustus, who viewed this step as a challenge or an unwillingness to fulfill his duty. In 2 CE, Tiberius finally returned to Rome, but his position remained precarious. He failed to regain Augustus' favor, who seemed to keep him at arm's length, forbidding him from engaging in any public activity. Fate, however, had an unexpected turn in store. Just 2 years later, in 4 CE, tragic events altered the course of history. Gaius and Lucius, the sons of Julia and Marcus Agrippa, Augustus' young favorites and carefully groomed heirs, suddenly died. This double loss left a profound void in the emperor's plans. It was then, with evident reluctance and little enthusiasm, that Augustus once again turned his gaze toward Tiberius, who now, by force of circumstance, found himself the sole and unavoidable candidate for the imperial throne. A series of official acts followed. Tiberius was appointed tribune of the plebs, received supreme imperium, and, most importantly, was formally adopted by Augustus, thereby legally solidifying his claim to the throne. And though Tiberius already had sons of his own, Augustus, demonstrating his foresight and desire for dynastic stability, compelled him to adopt Germanicus, the son of Tiberius' deceased brother, thus predetermining future intrigues and power struggles. Yet, even after all these significant events, another decade would pass before Tiberius finally ascended the imperial throne, marking only the beginning of his long and complex reign. During this period of Roman imperial history, Tiberius distinguished himself remarkably in military affairs. He effectively quelled revolts in Pannonia and stabilized the situation on the northern frontier after the crushing defeat suffered by Varus' forces in the Teutoburg forest. This tragic battle, which occurred in 9 CE, became a dark page in the annals of Rome. Publius Quinctilius Varus, a Roman commander of significant influence and high standing at the imperial court, had been appointed governor of the newly conquered province of Germania. Before this, Varus had successfully managed administrative affairs in important provinces such as Africa, Syria, and Judea, creating the impression of his full capability to handle any challenges in Germania. One of Varus' key advisors was Arminius, a native German brought to Rome as a child hostage to ensure the loyalty of his father, a tribal chief. Arminius had built an impressive military career in Rome, rising to the rank of cavalry officer. Varus undoubtedly valued Arminius' strategic and tactical recommendations regarding the governance of his former kinsman's territories. However, in the summer of 9 CE, Varus was lured into a deadly trap deep within the Teutoburg forest. For 3 days, Roman legions were subjected to continuous ambush attacks organized by a large coalition of Germanic tribes. Approximately 20,000 Romans perished, 3 legions, 6 auxiliary cohorts, and 3 cavalry aeli, along with 2 camp followers, were completely annihilated. It was then that Tiberius was swiftly dispatched with 2 legions and managed to strengthen the defensive lines along the Rhine, thereby preventing a large-scale invasion by the Germanic coalition into Gaul. Tiberius was repeatedly overlooked in matters of imperial succession, despite his undeniable talents in diplomacy, state administration, and all aspects of military affairs. A legitimate question arises: why did this happen? There were several reasons. Firstly, he was not blood-related to Augustus, he was the son of Augustus' wife from her previous marriage. Secondly, in Augustus' own opinion, Tiberius' character did not suit such a grand and responsible task. He was silent, reserved, and seemed suspicious and even stern to many. Belonging to the ancient Claudian gens, known for its pride, Tiberius fully shared this family trait. The repeated disregard from Augustus in matters of succession must have undoubtedly caused deep resentment in Tiberius. On August 19, 14 CE, Augustus passed away. A month later, the Senate convened, where the great Augustus was deified, and a proposal was put forth for Tiberius to receive the same high status and full powers held by his predecessor. At first, Tiberius rejected this offer. The precise motives for his refusal remain a subject of historical debate. Some ancient sources claim he merely feigned reluctance, following the example of Augustus himself, who had displayed similar hesitation upon taking office. However, it cannot be entirely ruled out that Tiberius' hesitation was genuine. At that point, he was 55 years old, and accepting power would mean many more years of intense public life, full of challenges and responsibilities. He had already shown indecisiveness before, when he voluntarily withdrew into exile on Rhodes. In any case, despite initial doubts, he eventually agreed to accept supreme power. Augustus had taken precautions beforehand to ensure a smooth transfer of power, sending relevant messages to provincial governors and military commanders directly before his death. During the same period, two localized disturbances erupted on the imperial frontiers, neither of which was caused by Tiberius' person nor by questions of succession. One flared up in the province of Pannonia, the other along the Rhine frontier. Drusus was dispatched to quell the rebels in Pannonia, while the revolt on the Rhine was handled by Tiberius' adopted son, Germanicus, who at the time served as governor of Gaul. Germanicus was an honorary cognomen, bestowed upon his father in recognition of outstanding military achievements in the Germanic lands. Germanicus himself, perhaps believing that active military operations against Germanic tribes would help maintain the high morale of the legions, led his troops across the Rhine. There he supported numerous tribes loyal to Rome and engaged in a series of skirmishes. His path also led him to the Teutoburg forest, where he performed burial rites for the fallen Roman soldiers. It should be noted that these military enterprises did not receive official sanction from Tiberius, and initially, Tiberius seemed to express displeasure at Germanicus' independent actions. However, when Germanicus failed to secure the necessary conditions for year-round Roman troop presence in Germany, Tiberius decided to recall him. At the time, there was a prevalent opinion that Tiberius was jealous of Germanicus' military successes in Germanic territory. However, it should be remembered that the previous emperor, Augustus, had earlier decreed that the empire should focus on internal consolidation rather than further territorial expansion. Thus, Tiberius' actions merely conformed to the strategic course set by Augustus. Let us emphasize once more, Germanicus' military campaigns were not sanctioned by Tiberius. Nevertheless, Germanicus succeeded in restoring shaken Roman prestige in the region after Varus' devastating disaster and simultaneously strengthened the empire's northern frontiers. It was likely this circumstance that led Emperor Tiberius to allow the campaign to continue, despite its initial unsanctioned nature. In the course of his military actions, Germanicus managed to recover two sacred eagles, the legionary battle standards ignominiously lost in the Teutoburg forest. For this outstanding feat, upon his return to Rome in 17 CE, he was granted a great triumph, commemorating his glorious deeds. Furthermore, in the following year, 18 CE, he was awarded one of the consulships, which he shared with Tiberius himself. In that historical period, Armenia represented a strategically vital buffer state situated between the powerful Parthian Empire and the Roman dominion, which, as history shows, inevitably led to numerous armed conflicts between the two great powers. When the Parthians, defying Roman influence, expelled Rome's protégé from the Armenian throne, Germanicus was immediately dispatched to the east with a mission to resolve this crisis. However, it seems Tiberius did not entirely trust his impulsive nephew, so as a precautionary measure, he also sent a new governor to the province of Syria, Gnaeus Calpurnius Piso. Piso's task was to closely monitor Germanicus' actions and prevent a potential escalation of the conflict that could lead to another full-scale war with Parthia. While in the east, Germanicus successfully annexed two former client states into the Roman Empire, both located in Anatolia, thereby expanding direct Roman influence. In addition, he appointed a new king in Armenia, re-establishing Roman control over this key region. Subsequently, Germanicus undertook a journey to Egypt. However, this province was under the emperor's personal administration, and no one was permitted to enter its territory without the monarch's direct permission, which Germanicus evidently lacked. Nevertheless, showing initiative, he alleviated the suffering of the local population from famine by ordering the opening of some Roman food warehouses. Upon Germanicus' return to Syria, he was met with an alarming sight. Gnaeus Calpurnius Piso seemed to be deliberately taking steps to revoke a number of his decrees previously issued in Anatolia. Shortly after Piso left Syrian lands, Germanicus' health rapidly deteriorated, ultimately leading to his demise. Germanicus himself was deeply convinced that his illness and death were the result of treacherous poisoning, orchestrated by Piso. Before his death, he even sent a message to his presumed poisoner, definitively severing their former friendly ties. Piso, however, did not accept this state of affairs and soon attempted to return to Syria but was forced to leave its territory as a legate. He was strictly forbidden from re-entering the province after he had officially renounced his control over it. Meanwhile, Germanicus' grieving wife, Agrippina, undertook a sorrowful journey, bringing the ashes of her untimely deceased husband to the heart of the Roman Empire. There, she was met by a grand procession of inconsolable citizens eager to pay their last respects to their beloved hero. Germanicus was immensely loved and revered by the people, who saw in him a true national hero, the embodiment of Roman virtues, and a hope for the future. When Piso finally returned to Rome, he was immediately brought to trial on charges of Germanicus' murder, as well as unlawfully re-entering the province of Syria after he had voluntarily relinquished his command. Although he managed to avoid conviction for Germanicus' murder, Piso nonetheless committed suicide, realizing the inevitability of being found guilty of violating the prohibition against entering Syria. However, ominous rumors rapidly spread throughout Rome, claiming that Piso had not only murdered Germanicus but had done so under the direct orders of Emperor Tiberius. Moreover, these same rumors hinted that it was Tiberius who forced Piso to commit suicide while in custody. The reason for such alleged imperial intervention was seen as his desire to secure the succession for his own son, Drusus, while Germanicus was gaining excessive popularity and increasingly acting without Tiberius' official sanction. The truth of these conjectures remains hidden by the veil of time, and we cannot assert with certainty how accurate they were. In any case, these widely circulating suspicions inflicted irreparable damage on Tiberius' reputation, as the Roman people were deeply convinced of his involvement in the events. Tiberius' own son, Drusus, was at that time the undisputed successor and the sole legitimate heir to the imperial throne. However, Agrippina, Germanicus' wife, felt a deep animosity towards Tiberius, triggered by her husband's tragic death. Agrippina came from a noble lineage, being the daughter of Marcus Agrippa and Julia, who, in turn, was the daughter of Augustus himself. Agrippina had 6 children with Germanicus, among whom was a boy named Gaius Caesar, named in honor of his illustrious ancestor, Gaius Julius Caesar. Nevertheless, he entered history under his well-known nickname, Caligula. Emperor Augustus had once established the Praetorian Guard, intended to serve as his personal bodyguard. At that time, the head of this guard was a man named Sejanus, who managed to establish close relations and gain Tiberius' trust. Sejanus' influence significantly strengthened when he was granted permission to redeploy the guard units within the city limits. This was a highly unusual event, as the Praetorian Guard had been allowed to carry arms inside the Pomerium, the sacred city boundary, only once before in history. However, relations between Tiberius' son, Drusus, and Sejanus were extremely tense. They were in a state of irreconcilable enmity. According to contemporary accounts, Drusus once struck Sejanus directly in the face. In retaliation, Sejanus cunningly seduced Drusus' wife, Livilla. When Drusus died suddenly, serious suspicions arose that his wife had poisoned him, acting at Sejanus' instigation. Nevertheless, Tiberius was still unaware of such treacherous schemes at the time. Sejanus' influence over Tiberius steadily increased, and he actively paved his way to imperial power, seeking to secure his own ascent to the throne. After Drusus was eliminated, Sejanus embarked on his cunning schemes directed against Agrippina, Germanicus' widow, her loyal associates, and her children. He succeeded in convincing Tiberius to exile Agrippina and one of her sons, while another son was thrown into prison in Rome, where he subsequently died of starvation. Thus, all who could potentially lay claim to the succession were systematically removed from the path, and Sejanus methodically cleared his way to the heights of power. He also persuaded Tiberius to go to Capri, a small island off the coast of Naples. The emperor was then 67 years old, and perhaps he was glad for the opportunity to partially withdraw from state affairs, entrusting the governance of the Eternal City to his trusted associate, Sejanus. In 29 CE, Livia, Tiberius' mother and Augustus' widow, passed away at the age of 86. During her lifetime, she had significant influence over Tiberius, and with her death, Sejanus' position must have strengthened even further. 2 years later, in 31 CE, Sejanus and Tiberius were appointed co-consuls, although Tiberius himself remained on Capri. Sejanus was permitted to marry a member of the imperial family, presumably Livilla, Drusus' widow. By this point, Sejanus was the undeniable arbiter of fate in Rome, and many anticipated his imminent announcement as the official successor. However, all this apparent favor turned out to be a clever trap. For Tiberius received a letter from Antonia, Germanicus' mother, which sowed deep suspicion in his soul. Tiberius then began the systematic elimination of Sejanus. He immediately summoned Gaius Caesar, the only surviving son of Germanicus and Agrippina, to Capri to protect him from the schemes of the all-powerful favorite. On October 18, Sejanus was summoned to the Senate, arriving with a message from Tiberius himself. It is likely that at this moment, Sejanus harbored hopes of being declared the emperor's official successor. However, these aspirations turned into bitter disappointment. Instead of the expected elevation, he was publicly denounced as a traitor and immediately strangled. Tiberius, in turn, experienced a profound shock when he realized the extent of the betrayal by a man he had considered his friend and confidant. Shortly after these events, Sejanus' widow sent a letter to Tiberius, revealing the horrifying truth. Sejanus had not only seduced Livilla but had also forced her to poison Drusus, Tiberius' son. This revelation only intensified the emperor's suspicion. After this, he very rarely left the safe confines of Capri, and he never returned to Rome. All who were in any way connected to Sejanus were ruthlessly dealt with in the streets of the Eternal City, and Tiberius, gripped by paranoia, created an extensive and complex spy network to identify any potential conspirators. As the years passed, Tiberius aged, and the question of succession became increasingly pressing and urgent. He was faced with a choice of three main candidates: his grandson Gemellus, Drusus' son, Gaius Caesar, known as Caligula, Germanicus' son, and his nephew Claudius. Gemellus was deemed too young for such a responsible role, while Claudius was considered too slow-witted. Ultimately, Tiberius decided to appoint Gemellus and Gaius as joint heirs. However, Gaius enjoyed significantly greater popularity among the populace, which was due to his closer connection to the illustrious Julian family and, of course, to his father Germanicus, the people's favorite. In 33 CE, Gaius began serving as quaestor, a relatively minor position in Rome's hierarchy, but Tiberius, for unexplained reasons, took no steps to prepare Gaius for taking on more serious state responsibilities. On March 16, 37 CE, Tiberius' earthly journey ended. He was 77 years old at the time of his death. The news of his passing was met in the Eternal City with unconcealed joy and widespread relief. In the historical sources that have reached us, Tiberius appears as an extremely unpopular figure, and many scholars believe that a significant part of this dislike is rooted in the events of the final years of his reign. Having withdrawn to the island of Capri, he continued to govern the empire, closely observing events in Rome through an extensive network of informants and spies. Any criticism directed at him was perceived as a sign of a potential conspiracy, giving him grounds for eliminating undesirable individuals. Malicious gossip circulating in Roman society depicted Tiberius' life on Capri as a series of bloody purges and sophisticated tortures, applied even for trivial offenses or the slightest irritation. However, it is fair to note that for most of his reign, the Roman Empire enjoyed a period of peace and demonstrated steady economic growth, experiencing prosperity. Many historians agree that Tiberius was a figure already disillusioned with the principate long before his accession to the throne. His life was spent in Augustus' shadow, and he was constantly perceived only as a last resort in matters of succession, which likely embittered him deeply. Thus, when he was finally proclaimed heir, the event carried a bittersweet undertone. If one is inclined to fully trust all the accounts of torture and cruelty attributed to Tiberius by ancient sources, it must be acknowledged that even these horrors pale in comparison to what the empire was about to endure in the near future. His place on the throne was taken by Gaius Caesar, who entered history under the name Caligula.